That story isn't about your skill. It is about a lie you were handed before you ever pushed a seed into the ground. The lie works like this. Somewhere in the last century, the American idea of a productive garden got locked into a very narrow list of plants, almost all of them bred for mild, well-watered climates, with deep, loamy soils and predictable rain: tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, lettuce, and sweet corn. The same catalog, whether you live in Ohio or in a landscape where the ground surface hits 200 degrees Fahrenheit in July, and the sky delivers less than 2 inches of rain in an entire year. Every growing guide, every seed packet, every cheerful YouTube thumbnail showing a lush raised bed assumes you have access to the kind of environment the Mojave has never been and will never become. So when your garden fails, the conclusion feels obvious. The desert is the problem, the heat is too brutal, the alkalinity too high, the diurnal swings too violent, and the drought is just too relentless. You're living in the most extreme hot desert, the same region that holds Death Valley at 282 feet below sea level, and registers air temperatures north of 130. So of course nothing actually grows here, except that is the second lie, and it is much bigger than the first, because while you were mourning your tomatoes, the Joshua Tree Forest, stretching across the high Mojave from 2,000 to 5,000 feet elevation, was quietly sustaining one of the most diverse, floristically diverse, plant communities in North America, more species than the Sahara, more than the Arabian Desert, and both of those are many times its size. The bajadas and alluvial fans spilling off every mountain. Around you were holding shrubs, succulents, and perennials that solved the exact problems that killed your garden, not last season, but over millions of years. Millions of years of evolutionary pressure, heat, aridity, alkaline, soil, and freezing winter nights. Wind that strips moisture from a leaf in hours. Every single constraint you were told made food impossible. The native plant community had already answered, and filed away in its DNA long before anyone drew a property line on this land. The system that failed you was never the Mojave, it was the plant list. A plant list designed for a climate 1,000 miles away, sold to you in a plastic clamshell at a big box store by a supply chain that profits whether your garden lives or dies, and profits more, frankly, when it dies, because then you drive back to the store and just buy their tomatoes instead. That isn't a gardening problem, that is a food sovereignty problem. You were placed inside a loop where the only way to eat is to keep paying, and the one exit, growing. Your own was sabotaged before you even started, by handing you seeds that have no business being in this ground. What nobody told you is that the Mojave already has its own food system, and it isn't some obscure foraging footnote. It is a collection of fruit-bearing, calorie-dense plants, drought-hardened plants that read the Mojave's climate profile. The bimodal rain pattern, the brutal summer, the cold winter, the alkaline powder. People call soil and simply recognize it as home. Plants that don't merely survive the afternoons, the 115-degree afternoons of the low desert around Barstow, but actually require that heat to set and ripen fruit, the way a date palm demands a minimum of 95 days, above 95 degrees, before it will finish a crop. The Mojave delivers that threshold with room to spare, and the long, hot accumulation of summer warmth pushes early ripening varieties and heavy fruit development straight through into autumn. 100 pounds of fruit from a single tree every year. For a century, no fertilizer, no tilled beds, no bags of amended soil hauled from a garden center, just one medjool date palm rooted into raw ground. Raw Mojave alkaline ground, watered deep and left alone. That is what the desert actually produces when you stop interfering with it. So why is your backyard barren? Why did your tomatoes scorch and your raised bed collapse into powder by July? Because someone sold you a system designed to fail, and then sold you the refills to keep it limping forward one season at a time. Think about the last time you stood in the garden aisle of a hardware store in Barstow, Lancaster, or Victorville. Bags of potting mix stacked to the ceiling, bottles of liquid fertilizer with cartoon vegetables on the label weed barrier, fabric rolled up like carpet, starter trays of lettuce, basil, and cherry tomatoes, plants that evolved in the mild, humid river valleys of Europe and Southeast Asia now shrink wrapped and sold to someone whose summer air drops to single-digit humidity right on a Tuesday afternoon. Every product on that shelf is an answer to a question the desert never asked, and every dollar you spend on it feeds a dependency loop that moves in one direction only, away from the soil and deeper into your wallet. Here is what those bags and bottles actually do to the ground right beneath your feet. The Mojave already runs a fungal network, a web of mycorrhizal threads that connects root systems across dozens of feet, shuttling water and phosphorus and nitrogen between plants in a slow exchange, a self-regulating exchange that has operated without interruption for thousands of years. That network is the desert's immune system. It is the reason a wild pomegranate seedling on an alluvial fan can push fruit in soil that reads pH 8.2 on a test strip in air so dry it cracks your knuckles, with no one standing over it, holding a hose. The fungal threads mine minerals from rock particles too small for roots to reach. They signal neighboring plants when insect pressure rises. They hold soil aggregates together so that when a summer monsoon finally does arrive, the water infiltrates instead of sheeting off the surface and carrying your topsoil into the wash. Now pour a bag of synthetic nitrogen over that network. The chemical salt dissolves on contact, delivers a spike of available nutrients so fast that the plant's roots stop communicating with the fungi entirely. Why negotiate a slow trade for phosphorus when someone just dumped a free buffet on your doorstep? Within weeks, the mycorrhizal threads begin to starve and collapse. The soil aggregates they held together fall apart. The ground compacts, water pools on the surface instead of sinking. You see the crust forming, think the soil is bad, and you till it, and tilling shreds whatever fungal network survived the fertilizer, exposes the subsurface moisture to Mojave sun that evaporates it in hours and resets the biological clock to zero. Now you have dead dirt, and dead dirt grows nothing without more fertilizer, more water, more intervention, more money. That isn't a gardening method, that is a subscription service disguised as agriculture. The same cycle plays out with herbicide. A pomegranate in its native Iranian desert shares root space with dozens of companion species, low scrubby aromatics, nitrogen fixing shrubs, ground covering succulents that shade the soil surface, and cut evaporation by half spray glyphosate around the base of that pomegranate. Keep the bed looking clean, and you kill the living mulch. That was doing more work than any drip timer you could install. You kill the microbial layer that was converting organic debris into slow-release fertility. You kill the very organisms that allowed pomegranate fruit to concentrate sugars to levels that humid climate growers cannot touch, because in the Mojave, where summer humidity drops into single digits, during the ripening window, the arils develop without cracking, without rot, without the moisture interference that splits skins and dilutes flavor everywhere else on the continent. That quality isn't a product of your effort. It is a product of a biological system that was already running. And every modern input you were told to buy is a tool that dismantles it. The real cost isn't even the money, though the money is completely obscene. It is the time. A jujube tree planted into undisturbed Mojave ground in the same brutal heat and cold cycle that matches its native range in northern China will produce heavy crops of dense, calorie-rich fruit for decades with almost no irrigation once established. But if you spent 3 years tilling and fertilizing and spraying that ground before you planted it, you destroyed the fungal infrastructure the jujube needed to establish its deep root system. Now, it depends on you. Now it needs supplemental water every week instead of every 3. Now it needs feeding every spring. Now it is a pet instead of a partner. Multiply that across every tree, every shrub, every vine in your yard, and you begin to see the shape of the trap. You weren't failing because the desert is hostile. You were failing because every product you bought made the desert more hostile, one dead fungal thread at a time. That dependency was never an accident. It is the business model. And the only way out is to stop buying inputs and start reading what the ground was already doing before you went ahead and broke it. That tree nobody waters. dropping 100 pounds of fruit, while your raised bed collapses every single August. It is not performing a miracle, it is running an operating system. An operating system already installed in the ground long before anyone showed up with a bag of amendments. And the reason most people never see it is simple, because the entire system lives right below the surface, in a web of biological transactions so precise and old that calling it primitive would be like calling the internet primitive just because the cables are buried underground. Here is what is actually happening under a single juju tree, rooted into raw Mojave. Kalash at 3,000 feet, the root system doesn't feed itself, it outsources. Mycorrhizal fungi, thread-like filaments thinner than a human hair, extend from the root tips outward into rocky soil that no root could ever penetrate alone. Those fungal threads dissolve phosphorus directly out of calcium carbonate, shuttle it back to the tree, and in exchange receive sugars. Sugars the tree manufactured directly from sunlight. That isn't a metaphor. That is a chemical transaction, happening millions of times per hour across a massive network that can stretch dozens of feet from the trunk, in absolutely every possible direction. The tree isn't surviving despite the alkaline soil. The tree is mining the alkaline soil through a contractor. A contractor it is. Been paying in carbon for 60 million years. And the fungal network is only the first layer around those threads. Bacteria cluster in incredibly dense biofilms. They change the local chemistry of the soil particle. The exact soil particle they're just sitting on. They fix nitrogen from atmosphere trapped in soil pores. They produce organic acids that weather rock into calcium. The tree can actually manage to absorb. They generate polysaccharides, sticky molecular chains that glue sand, gluing sand and fragments into very stable aggregates, which hold the little moisture that does arrive in a Mojave rain event exactly where the roots can reach it, instead of letting it sheet off the Kalash surface and just completely vanish down the wash. Every organism in that underground assembly performs a specific job, a job that makes the next job completely possible. The bacteria feed the fungi feed the tree, and the tree turns right around and feeds the bacteria. The whole loop runs on. Rainfall measured in single-digit inches per year, because it was engineered by evolution to operate on exactly that budget, not on 60 inches. Not the 60 inches of annual water a Kentucky lawn expects. This is the law. That got buried when the fertilizer bag showed up. A prickly pear clump sitting on an exposed ridge where no irrigation line will ever reach isn't clinging to life. It is actually the anchor point of a micro-ecosystem. Its pad structure shades the soil surface directly beneath it, dropping ground temperature by as much as 30 degrees, compared to the exposed Kalash 3 feet away. That temperature differential creates a moisture gradient. Condensation collects on the underside of the pads at night. When desert air cools fast, it drips onto the soil that is now biologically active because of shade and moisture. It allowed fungal colonization that bare ground simply cannot support. Insects shelter in the pad joints. Their waste feeds the bacterial layer. The bacterial layer feeds the fungal layer, extending outward. It connects to the wolfberry shrub growing 6 feet away on the rocky slope. And now, both plants are sharing phosphorus and water signals through a network that neither one built alone. That wolfberry is the same genus as the high-dollar goji berry, selling for absurd prices in vacuum-sealed pouches at the store. It fruits twice a year in the Mojave without human input. Once in late spring, before the heat hammer falls, and once in autumn, right after it finally lifts. It does this because the fungal network it is plugged into reads seasonal soil, temperature shifts, and adjusts nutrient delivery on a schedule that no drip timer could ever replicate. The berries are loaded with lutein, vitamin C, and polysaccharides at concentrations that match or exceed the high altitude Chinese goji because the plant isn't stressed. It is just responding. Every molecule of UV light that hits that shrub triggers a cascade of protective compound production. That becomes one of the most nutrient-dense foods available from any garden system on the continent. And it grew from a crack in the rock where you did absolutely nothing except not interfere. This is the code. Shade creates moisture. Moisture invites fungi. Fungi connect. Roots and connected roots share resources. Shared resources let plants fruit in conditions that would kill any annual vegetable in 48 hours. It isn't magic, and it certainly isn't luck. It is a biological infrastructure that has been running in the Mojave for longer than agriculture has existed on Earth. And the only reason it looks impossible is simple. We've been measuring productivity by the standards of a system that requires truckloads of inputs to produce anything at all. The Mojave doesn't need your inputs. It needs you to stop paving over the network that was already there. Because once you see how that network responds to design, the yields stop looking like survival and start looking like abundance. Here is the thing nobody tells you about dried figs. The best ones on earth, selling for $12 a pound, the Turkish Smyrna figs that define the entire global trade. Those figs weren't manufactured, they were completely abandoned, left on the branch, past the point of any reasonable grower, left hanging in dry desert air until the moisture bled out through the skin, concentrating sugars into something dense and complex. Something no dehydrator, no processing line, no factory could replicate. And the Mojave does this completely for free. A black mission fig left on its branch past August will slowly surrender its water to that brutal, low humidity air. Through September and October, arriving by early November, at a state of preservation that required no electricity, no sulfur treatment, and absolutely no human hand at all. Just the patience to do absolutely nothing while the climate works, a service that other regions spend thousands of dollars imitating. That is ecological leverage, not adding a step, removing one. The entire drying infrastructure that commercial fig operations depend on. Temperature-controlled rooms, the timing protocols, the packaging lines, all of it replaced by a single, lazy decision, which is to walk away from the tree completely and let the desert finish what it already started. And this principle, once you see it, starts repeating everywhere, across every plant that actually belongs in this landscape. Take wolfberry, the same plant high-end. Supplement companies selling as high antioxidant goji at absurd markups. Growing wild across the harshest alkaline flats of the Mojave, producing more protective compounds precisely because of ultraviolet bombardment, the elevation. Forces it to defend itself even harder. You don't baby this plant into production, you plant it in your worst ground, the driest, most alkaline, most neglected corner of your property. Give it one deep watering, occasional irrigation through its first summer, and then you stop, you just leave it alone. It spreads by underground runners, colonizing difficult ground on its own schedule, and delivers 2 fruiting windows per year, perfectly aligned with the Mojave seasonal pattern, without management, beyond the radical decision to simply not intervene. The less you do, the more territory it claims. The more hostile the soil, the more nutritional density it packs. Every instinct that conventional gardening trained right into you, the impulse to amend, to fertilize, to endlessly fuss, actively works against this plant. Your job is to get out of its way. Now scale that logic up to something with a longer timeline, and an even more dramatic long-term payoff. The pistachio is native to the rocky desert slopes of Iran and Afghanistan, landscapes that share with the high Mojave the exact same convergence, the same convergence of extreme summer heat and cold winters. Winters just harsh enough to break dormancy, and low humidity, and alkaline drained soils that most food plants refuse outright. 1 male tree pollinates 8 females through wind alone. No bees required. No hand pollination. No intervention. You plant them in your hottest, most exposed, best drained positions, and then you just wait 5 years, sometimes 7, and during those years, every neighbor running a raised bed is buying soil amendments and replacing their drip lines, fighting the same annual battle against a brutal climate, a climate that was never going to cooperate with tomatoes. Meanwhile, your pistachios are quietly building root systems that will easily outlast your mortgage. And when they finally come into production, a single mature tree in the right Mojave elevation drops 15 to 25 pounds of in-shell nuts in a heavy year, nuts with storage quality measured in years. Storage quality measured in years, not just weeks. Nutritional density that rivals any annual crop you could grow, and a market value that makes the entire wait worth it. The smartest investment you never actually had to manage. Brown. Turkey figs handle the coldest high elevation Mojave winters. They handle those winters without even flinching. Cadota produces white fleshed fruit that eats beautifully fresh and preserves even better in sheltered positions. A mature fig needs deep water every 2 to 3 weeks. In summer, it delivers 2 crops per year in hotter valleys. The second one perfectly timed for effortless autumn. Drying Kerman pistachios set the largest nuts with the best flavor, pollinated reliably by Peter's males flowering on the same schedule. None of this requires a greenhouse or imported soil. None of it requires you to fight the Mojave. Every one of these plants runs on the exact same engine, a climate so extreme that it does the concentrating, the preserving, the defending, and the selecting that gentler environments force you to do by hand. The leverage isn't in what you add to the system, it is in what you finally stop subtracting from it. And once that ecological leverage actually starts compounding, once the wolfberry is colonizing your absolute worst ground while the figs dry themselves right on the branch and the pistachios quietly bank calories in durable shells that easily last for years at a time, the garden stops asking anything of you at all and starts offering something no annual vegetable plot ever provided: a perennial food system that gets more productive over time, the longer you leave it completely alone. That is the point where the conversation shifts from individual plants to the ones almost nobody is actually growing, the deeply overlooked species that round out this system, rounding it out into something genuinely complete, starting with a fruit tree, so ancient and perfectly suited to this harsh landscape, that its near total absence from American gardens is strange, one of the strangest oversights in home food production history. Picture the inevitable next supply chain collapse, not the hypothetical one, but the real one, the kind where the produce aisle goes completely bare in 72 hours, and the only lettuce left costs $9 for a single head. Picture your neighbor loading canned goods into a cart with that hollow look right behind the eyes, the one that says he knows this food will work. It will keep him alive, but certainly not well. Now picture yourself walking into your backyard in the high Mojave autumn, reaching up into a tree that has been standing there for 6 years without a single complaint, and pulling down a golden fist-sized fruit, so fragrant it fills the entire garden with scent, the scent of roses and warm honey. That beautiful fruit is a quince. The distance between you and your neighbor in that moment isn't luck, isn't wealth, and it isn't acreage. It is a single decision you made half a decade ago to stop begging a broken system for permission to eat. The quince is a plant most American gardeners don't know, have never even heard of, and that silence isn't accidental. It doesn't fit the industrial model. You can't eat it raw. You can't just eat it raw off the shelf. It demands that you actually know how to cook, how to preserve, how to transform a hard astringent fruit into amber jelly. With a flavor so layered and floral, it makes commercial grape jam taste like sugar water. Quince paste, the kind Mediterranean families have sliced alongside cheese for absolute centuries. It stores for months at room temperature, one established tree in rocky, alkaline, unirrigated Mojave soil produces enough fruit in a single autumn to fill your pantry shelf with heavy preserves that last until the following harvest. It handles 15 below zero, sending roots deep past caliche into moisture reserves that no drip line will ever reach. It asks nothing from the supply chain, nothing from fertilizer, nothing from you except the patience to let it become what thousands of years of evolution already designed it to be in the dry mountains of Asia, and beside that quince, in the lowest swale of your property, where roof runoff pools after a summer monsoon. A blue elderberry is doing something completely confusing. It would confuse anyone who thinks the desert cannot grow abundance. This plant reads the landscape the way water reads gravity. It doesn't need your entire yard to be wet. It needs one seam, one crease in the terrain, where moisture gathers, the same wash bottom habitat, where it has grown wild across the Mojave for millennia. You put it right at the base of a downspout along a simple earthwork swale in any low pocket, where rain concentrates instead of just evaporating away, and it responds as if you planted it in the rainy Pacific Northwest, heavy clusters of blue, black berries in autumn, flowers in late spring for syrup, medicine, and drying. A plant that turns the Mojave bimodal rainfall pattern, the very thing that makes this desert feel impossible, straight into its own personal irrigation schedule. You didn't pipe in water from somewhere else, you just stopped letting the water you already received disappear. Then there is the incredibly useful desert willow, a plant that most nursery tags will never label as food because it doesn't fit into the grocery store logic of what feeding yourself is supposed to look like, but indigenous communities of this landscape have eaten its flowers and its seed pods for absolute centuries, long before anyone decided that food had to come wrapped in plastic on a refrigerated truck 1,500 miles away. The desert willow produces those trumpet-shaped blooms from late spring deep into the brutal summer, feeds every pollinator your other food plants depend on, and anchors a guild of ecological relationships that make the soil around it far more alive, more fertile, more capable of supporting the next plant. The next plant you decide to put in the ground. It isn't a single crop. It is an infrastructure decision. It is the kind of thinking that a supply chain cannot replicate, and a grocery store simply cannot sell you. This is what the final picture actually looks like. Not a neat suburban garden bed with tomato cages, with drip timers and a monthly fertilizer bill, a whole system. Quince trees holding the deep soil, elderberries harvesting the rain you already get, desert willows feeding the biology that feeds everything else, figs drying quietly on a screen in October heat, wolfberries producing through the cold months when nothing else will, date palms carrying sugar and calories straight through winter. A four-season food system built entirely on resilient plants that were solving the Mojave's problems long before you even bothered to show up. Plants that don't need the economy to actively function, just in order to keep you completely fed when the next disruption hits, and it definitely will. The people still dependent on that long supply chain, that 1,800-mile supply chain will feel it immediately. The shelves will thin, the prices will spike, the panic will be real, and you'll walk out your back door into a garden that doesn't know a crisis is happening because it was never connected to the thing that broke.